Okay, so hey everyone, thank you so much for being here and for joining our webinar tonight on Western Watersheds Project's CalPI-PAL app, which is how to turn your hike into habitat defense. My name is Grace Kuhn. I'm the digital director for Western Watersheds Project, and I'm going to be your host this evening. So tonight you're going to hear about why citizen science documentation on public lands is more important than ever. You're going to learn the basics of rangeland health indicators, how to properly document what you see in the field, and how to use the CalPI-PAL app effectively. And so I just said this, but if you haven't already, please download the free ArcGIS Survey 123 app so we can walk you through each step, which will be closer towards the end of the presentation. Throughout the talk, I'm going to put links for the Apple and Google downloads in the chat. And you're welcome to submit questions throughout the webinar. You'll see the chat function, and we'll answer as many of those as we can. If time allows, we'll also take additional questions at the end. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So first up, we have Josh Osher. He is our Public Policy Director for Western Watersheds Project, and he's going to explain why this tool is so necessary. Josh is a conservation advocate with a background in political science and economics. At Western Watersheds, he oversees our policy, sets our advocacy priorities, shapes strategy on key wildlife and public lands issues, and our legislative work, and represents the organization in the halls of Congress. After Josh, you're going to hear from our Colorado director, Delaney Rudy. And Delaney earned her BS in biology from University of Puget Sound, where she studied lichen as bioindicators of air quality across Asia. Before joining Western Watersheds, she spent 8 seasons with the U.S. Forest Service in Colorado and Montana on wilderness trail crews, on wildland fire crews, and as a biological science technician. As Colorado director, she leads our work across the state, drawing on her background to protect public lands and the ecological communities that they support. And then last but not least, you will hear from Cindy Toole, our Arizona and New Mexico director. Cindy is an attorney and longtime conservation advocate with more than a decade of experience defending federal public lands in the Southwest. She holds a BS in ecology and evolutionary biology and a JD from the University of Arizona, where she researched grazing impacts on state trust lands and co-authored 2 publications on Western trust land management. As director of Arizona and New Mexico, she leads our efforts to protect native species habitat and strengthen land management policies across both states. So we have some smarty pants on the call tonight. So with that, we're going to begin, and I'm going to hand it over to Josh to discuss why citizen science is needed more than ever right now on Western public lands. So Josh, take it away. Okay, Josh, I think you're muted.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Okay, great. And I think you can see my screen, right? Okay, great. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Osher, and as Grace said, I'm the Public Policy Director for Western Watersheds Project. I've been working on federal public lands policy for over 20 years, including more than a decade in the field, directly observing, documenting, and responding to land management activities, both destructive and positive. Tonight, we are not here to debate the merits and value of public lands ranching. We're going to start from the baseline perspective that a large percentage of public lands that are managed for grazing are degraded due to livestock production, which negatively impacts ecosystem function, fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, native plants and soils, recreational opportunities, wilderness qualities, and resiliency to climate change, drought, and aridification. And we know this because for over 30 years, Western Watersheds Project and our allies have been meticulously documenting the impacts of grazing across the Western US on lands managed by the United States Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service. And we also know this because the agency's own data, the data that we do have, shows that tens of millions of acres of the lands they manage are not meeting the most basic and fundamental standards for rangeland health, primarily due to livestock grazing. So tonight, what we're here to do is introduce a tool that will help you, the public, and public land owners to hold the federal agencies and public lands livestock permittees accountable for the damage caused to your public lands. Livestock grazing is permitted on approximately 250 million acres of federal public lands in the 11 Western states. At WWP, we have 9 state directors covering this vast landscape, and we do our best to see and document as much as we can. And we've been counting on you, our supporters, members, and the interested public to help us identify the places to look. This new tool, the CalPyPal app, is a way to expand on that model and build on our long track record of effectiveness to shed light on and stop grazing damage across the West. Some people might ask, why is it necessary for the public to be doing this kind of documentation of our public lands? Aren't there professionals at the agencies whose responsibility is to make sure that the regulations and laws are being followed? Well, in an ideal world, the answer would be yes. You might logically expect that the agencies wouldn't be permitting activities that they don't have the capacity to manage and monitor. But the truth is, in terms of livestock grazing, this has always been the case. The entire system of laws and policies to manage the public lands grazing were developed long after the cattle and sheep ranchers had claimed the use of the land for themselves. At each step, there have been clear and undisputed findings by Congress that the federal agencies that the public lands have been severely degraded by livestock and are in need of management to help them recover. Unfortunately, the programs established by Congress and implemented by land management agencies to regulate and manage grazing have been hamstrung by industry capture, underfunding and understaffing, and a general lack of accountability for both agency staff and grazing permittees. And in the rare cases where agency managers actually do attempt to do something about the destruction caused by grazing permittees, they're often pressured to back off by higher level managers and local politicians, and even in extreme circumstances are the victims of violent threats. All this has led to a vicious cycle where agency managers are unable or unwilling to do the necessary oversight and monitoring of the grazing allotments under their care, and thus are unable to meet the statutory requirements for the reissuance of grazing permits. The problem got so bad that in the late 1990s, Congress started attaching riders to annual appropriations bills that exempted grazing permit renewals from environmental review, and thus also from any public scrutiny. In 2014, the inaptly named Grazing Improvement Act was added to a defense authorization bill to make this loophole permanent. If grazing wasn't already about the lowest priority management priority for the agencies, the codification of the permit renewal rider tipped the scales. Here's a map that shows the extent of BLM grazing allotments that have been renewed at least once without any new analysis, which also means in most cases, no recent assessments or monitoring. The ones that have been renewed without NEPA analysis and therefore without assessments are in red. The orange ones that you can see, those are like partial NEPA, so might be large allotments where part of it's been assessed and part not. And the blue on the map, those are the permits that actually have had some level of NEPA analysis, National Environmental Policy Act analysis, and typically also some sort of assessment. And even a lot of these most recently are being approved through categorical exclusions. So it means not an extensive analysis and no public participation. In fact, we know for example, in Eastern Montana in the Miles City field office, the BLM renewed over 1,300 permits at one time using a categorical exclusion and only had data that was remote sensing data to determine that the allotments were meeting the standards. They never set foot on most of these places. They just looked at the remote sensing data, said everything was great, and used a categorical exclusion from NEPA to renew the permits. So again, no process, no real assessment. So we, the story actually, this is the BLM, but when we look at the Forest Service, the story is even worse. our records, agency records that we've gotten from the Forest Service indicate that 95% of allotments are renewed with no public process and no environmental analysis. So 95%. I mean, that means that only 5% of the grazing allotments managed by the National Forest Service are actually undergoing a process of extensive review, environmental analysis, and public input before determining whether a permit should be issued for another 10 years. And if you thought that with all the limited resources that the agencies have, that they would prioritize at least the most sensitive areas, well, guess again. Here's a chart that kind of shows you for the BLM, these particular categories and the extent of this issue. 60% of the allotments of all allotments are renewed without new analysis. But take, for example, bighorn sheep habitat. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but domestic sheep carry a pathogen that's fatal to bighorn sheep, right? So it's extremely important to manage these allotments well. And in areas where we have documented, occupied bighorn sheep habitat and domestic sheep allotments, 90% of those allotments are being renewed without any environmental analysis, no public process, no assessment of the risk or threats. That's just, the most extreme example, but it's down the line. This is kind of the standard practice at the agency. There's no reason to think that this situation is going to get any better on its own. We're all aware of the recent staffing and funding cuts affecting public lands management agencies. And it's true that even fewer people are managing the grazing program than ever before. But this is not a partisan problem. Regardless of the administration in charge, grazing program is always getting swept under the rug. Whatever the agency finds they don't want to deal with, they leave it for another day. They turn a blind eye, stick their head in the sand, and avoid dealing with the grazing program. So this is where you all come in. If the agencies can't or won't do their job, then it's really up to all of us to be the eyes and the ears for the defense of our public lands. And by shining a spotlight on what's really happening out there, we can try and put pressure on the agencies to step up and do something to stop the destruction. It might be through media and social pressure. It might be litigation. It might be getting Congress to fix the laws and demand some accountability. But we need your help. And tonight we're here to provide the tools and knowledge to be effective advocates for our public lands and all the many values that they provide and represent.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate that. Okay, so next up, Delaney's going to walk you through land health indicators and how to effectively document damage to public lands.
Sorry, let me get my slideshow up. Should be good to go. All right. Thank you all for joining tonight, for your interest in helping us gather better data and more robust data and tell a story about what's happening on the landscape. We're really hopeful that the CowPie Pal app will help you all feel more empowered to be involved in decision making and help us better tell that story. So hopefully this is helpful. The majority of this presentation and the information that I'm kind of pulling this from is from this guide, which is developed by an interagency team, including the Forest Service, the BLM, NRCS, and a handful of other partners. This is what the agencies use to analyze what the land health is looking like out on the range. And so it's a useful tool for us to be able to see what sort of information the agencies are interested in, what sort of information could sway them, and just understand how these agencies are thinking. So the main three tenets that they use for for assessing land health are soil and site stability, hydrologic function, and biotic integrity. And as you can see, there are a lot of different categories within those three that are all sort of interconnected. And so when I'm thinking about these indicators of rangeland health, I'm sort of wondering, what can the land tell me? What can reading the land tell me about the way that water is moving over the land, about the way that the soils are being affected by that water movement, and the way that nutrients and the biotic community are affected by those impacts. So all of these things are really interconnected, but I think it's really helpful to sort of look at each of some high points from each of these categories and sort of start training your brain to recognize them when you're out in the field. I had a professor and a mentor who I admire so much, Dr. Carrie Woods, and when she was teaching us about mosses, she would say to put on your moss goggles. But so similarly, you can put on your rangeland health goggles. But I warn you that once you start seeing the stuff on the landscape, it's difficult to stop seeing it. So proceed with caution. But these signs and signals about the health of the land are surrounding us all the time. So both of these two tables are taken from interpreting indicators of rangeland health, and you can see through them the way that they have these categories, but they're all really interconnected. So the first sort of indicator that is easy to start seeing are rills, and there are a broad family of basically water marks on the landscape. Rills are the smaller version of what you might identify as a gully. They're typically in line with the slope of the landscape, kind of fall line, and they just indicate that there's perennial water flow across, or sorry, not perennial, ephemeral water flow across the landscape, and can be an early indicator of an erosion problem. Here's another example of rills. These images have a little bit more information about sheet flow, and basically where rills, there are small amounts of water that are flowing in sort of linear patterns. Sheet flow is a little bit more spread out. So also an earlier indicator, but when you see bare ground, you can sort of assess maybe how the soil is stacking up or how litter is stacking up, and determine whether it's a piece of bare ground that's just trampled or if it's experiencing erosion also. Wind erosion is something that we don't often think about, except for in Southwest Colorado in the springtime, because a lot of dust blows up from our beautiful Southwest deserts and coats our snowpack and can contribute to the expediting the loss of snow from our mountains. And so, but also it's really interesting to see wind erosion in the field, and can also be an indicator that cattle are doing some real damage on the landscape. Basically, with any of these erosive indicators, there are biotic processes via plants or biological soil crusts that are supposed to, or typically in proper functioning condition, will keep that soil in place. And any of these indicators basically start to tell the story that there's not enough of a functioning community to retain the soil in the landscape. So this is one of my favorite pictures from Canyons of the Ancients of a really impressive soil pedestal from some wind erosion. And another indicator of wind erosion is that collection of sort of larger sized rocks on the surface, because the wind will sweep away finer particle matter, but not some of those bigger pebbles. Gullies, bigger rill, basically. The line between gullies and rills, they are 1 to 2 feet wide and deep. Beyond that, you would consider it a gully. And gullies basically indicate where there are like nick points and water starts to accelerate. And so large amounts of soil can be lost from the landscape through gullying, and also it can make it much more difficult for wildlife to access that perennial water. So gullies are always a good thing to flag on the landscape, and a really important indicator of extreme erosion. And you can see, especially in that bottom right-hand picture, the water flow level is so far beneath the upland sagebrush level there, just because of continuous erosion. These photos capture a little bit more about infiltration. When water is flowing across the landscape in sheet flow or gullies, or in rilling, you'll see, or there's less water that's then going to infiltrate and recharge groundwater and that sort of thing. So there are many reasons to keep track of these things, but yeah, just more examples of what to be looking for and what sort of soil movement and the soil stability indicators to be aware of. Also here, compaction, that's a huge problem from the weight of livestock on the landscape. And so when that compaction happens in the soil, you can see in that right side image that the roots of plants in the soil can't penetrate downward. They're growing out laterally, and that has to do with soil particles. But in areas that are really compacted like this, you both have groundwater infiltration problems, and you can have springs drying up, and that sort of thing can impede the exit of groundwater. Bare ground, the main thing that I wanted to emphasize here is the bottom right, that bare ground can be natural in the landscape. You know, there can be anthills. There are places where there would be bare ground without the influence of livestock grazing. So sort of learning to train your eye between, oh, okay, that's an anthill, that's an area that's more natural, but you'll see wide areas of bare ground in some of these overgrazed allotments. Here, the emphasis is on, despite the fact that there is, between the top left and the bottom right, there's similar cover, but the bottom right, it's almost exclusively cheatgrass. So learning to recognize just a few invasive species can help you understand what's really present on the landscape. And especially cheatgrass has tremendous impacts on wildlife, and can outcompete a lot of native grasses. This is an example of an interesting example of compromised biotic integrity. You can see some of these bunch grasses, when they're overgrazed, will start to die from the center. And so as the center of the bunch grass starts to die, it will expand sideways. So whenever you see a bunch grass like this, it's an indicator that it's been overgrazed, or it's been grazed too intensely. These guys are some of my my favorite creatures out on the landscape. These are biological soil crusts, and they're a really good way to map where livestock are, and to map, you know, paths of least resistance, if you will. And I'm sure everyone's heard the old adage of don't bust the crust when you're out wandering through the desert. And so it takes a really long time for these soil crusts to recover. And so sometimes there are reference areas that you can capture the difference between a bare ground area and biological soil crust area, and demonstrate that there should be more crusts in the area that you care about than there are. Riparian areas, we're so used to seeing really degraded riparian areas. So what we're seeing on the right there is maybe more familiar than what we're seeing on the left. And I wanted to also note that the riparian area we're seeing on the left is still recovering. Like, I wouldn't say this is at full potential, but healthier riparian areas will be characterized by more riparian vegetation. So you'll see more willows and rushes and sedges, and also by just slower water flow, and more shaded water. All of that is really good for wildlife and for the health of our waterways. And obviously on the right-hand side, you see stream incision and a lot of bare ground surrounding that stream bank. And it's a great example of, the cattle trails that go right down into the creek there. This is just an interesting, this is from Ripple, 2022, I think, one of my favorite studies on rewilding, but just a really great example of how riparian areas look as they're recovering versus in their degraded condition. And so I think it's kind of an opportunity too to have a little bit more imagination when you're on the landscape of what could be here, what maybe was here, and be curious about what story the land is telling you. So some things to keep an eye out for when you're out on the landscape. One thing, this is an exclosure, and so typically exclosures are maintained and established by the BLM or the Forest Service or whatever agency is managing that part of land. And they're usually to either protect a sensitive resource, so maybe there's a sensitive plant community or a spring or a seep or a wetland or a fen. So they'll put an exclosure around it to protect it from the impacts of grazing, or sometimes they're used just for having a comparison, a baseline comparison. And so when these exclosures are have fallen down, that can not only have a devastating effect on whatever is being protected within the exclosure, but it can also just really leave us with no baseline of what might be there without grazing. So whenever you see an exclosure down, it's good to document that. And hopefully that's something that the agencies will be responsive to. Whenever you see a water resource, especially a spring that's being trampled in, that's something to keep an eye out for. Those springs, many of them, once they're compacted, will just stop flowing. And, as arid as we are in the West, we need to keep those springs flowing. So keep documenting those instances of riparian and spring degradation are really important. When you are taking photos of livestock, if you suspect that there are trespass livestock and you want to make a record of that, if it is safe, that is the biggest qualifier for all of this, is if you can safely get close enough and at an angle to capture a brand on the livestock or an ear tag, those can be really helpful in helping agency staff identify who those livestock belong to and know who to call to get them off as quickly as possible. This, Josh sort of foreshadowed for me. There are huge concerns for disease transmission between domestic sheep and bighorn sheep. Similar to old world pathogens that impacted indigenous people, domestic sheep just don't have the immunity to some of these pathogens that are commonly carried by, wild sheep don't have immunity to the pathogens that domestic sheep can carry. And on domestic sheep grazing allotments, if a bighorn comes in contact with those domestic sheep, and in other circumstances where that might happen too, that domestic or that wild sheep can bring disease back to their herd. And so in Colorado, there is a monitoring program through the app iNaturalist. I don't know of programs in other states to similarly keep an eye out, but that exists so you can document where wild sheep are, and especially if they are anywhere near domestic sheep, you want to have documentation of that and you want to let folks know as soon as you can, because the wild sheep can then bring those diseases back to their herds and they can become established in the herd, and that can lead to all age mortality events. So it's a huge concern, and especially if you see bighorn sheep and wild sheep in the same place, that's something to look out for and to take note of. Salt. At the end of the grazing season, permittees are supposed to remove their mineral resources, their salt, from the landscape. This is an example where there was salt that had been out there for seasons and was not gone with the cows. So when you see salt, document it. That can be in violation of a permit. This is another example of an impacted spring. This, I think, is a really good example because the flume that you see in the middle, that flume would usually be in the channel of a stream, and so it's a way to quantify the water flow. And you can see how much erosion has happened at this site, that the entire stream bank is gone and the flume is now just sitting on top of the ground. So looking out for things like that that can tell a story of what the impacts have been over time can be a really, really valuable use of this tool. So some best practices, and then I'll turn this over to Cindy. When you're framing your pictures, it's really good to give a little bit of landscape context. So one thing we don't want is just pictures of cow pies. We know they're everywhere, and could just end up being really an immense number of data points. But we do like them if, like in this instance, the cow pie is sort of telling you something about what's going on. You know, there's really, really short clipped grass all around this wet meadow here. And so incorporating both landscape identifiers and some of those closer, some of those more direct links to uh, to the livestock grazing itself can be important. Then, sorry. Also, I want to emphasize this is a good example of it also using landscape identifiers that are not going to move. And so this is how the agencies also do their ocular monitoring, is they'll have photo points and they'll use the same ridge line or the same large rock and be able to replicate those photos over time. So it's good to be able to have a little bit more of an idea of where you are in the landscape. And with CowPyPal, you can take a couple pictures for each data point. And so you can take a picture looking out that gives a little bit of context, and then another picture at your feet of what you're seeing straight down. And so I wouldn't recommend putting more than 2 or 3 or 4 photos in one photo point or one observation in CowPyPal, but it's a good way to kind of combine those different styles of information. It's really good to use reference points. So in this context, my friend was the best reference point to use for how deep this gully had become. But Josh had a great tip that he learned from a colleague to throw out a neon golf ball. It can be a useful way to see whether there's cover, but you can use anything. I think using a water bottle is a great way to just sort of add scale to these pictures. Like this gully would be, it's difficult to tell the story visually in a photo, and so just having that impact of some level of scale can be helpful. And you can carry a ruler if you want to, but there are a lot of other ways to get creative with it. And then finally, I think it's really important to think about how these images are going to be used to tell a story, and how these images might be used to bolster advocacy. So this image is from Canyons of the Ancients National Monument, and you can see in sort of the foreground on the left-hand side, there's a bit of a potsherd. And so the reason that that monument was designated in the first place was to protect archaeological resources. But as you can see, there's gully and rill formation here from some of that accelerated erosion, and that is a direct threat to those cultural resources. So capturing when you can, being able to capture pictures that can tell a story and can really tell the story of the land. Many of these indicators are backed up with qualitative methods, so you can do a line point intercept survey or something like that, but also many of them are not. The range management relies on a lot of ocular estimations, and so it's a really awesome opportunity to use visual storytelling and to let the land tell its story. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it over to Cindy.
Grace, did you want to have Delaney answer any of the questions that were in the chat live, or do you want to wait and hold those?
But I think Delaney, feel free to answer them in the chat itself. And then if we have questions at the end, we can do those verbally. But
Awesome.
feel free to take it away.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have already learned a lot this evening, and I've been doing this a long time. So I really appreciate my coworkers being so informed and sharing that information. So I'm going to go through the very practical aspects of using the CowPie Pal and the Survey 123 app. So just a reminder, you can find the information on how to access the Survey 123 app and the CowPie Pal on our website. And I think Grace can provide a link to that in the chat so people can copy it if they need to access it right now. Hopefully you all have downloaded the CowPie Pal and or the Survey 123 app already. But if you haven't, I'm going to walk you through it very quickly. You're going to want to go to your phone's app store. And when you open that up, you're going to want to use your phone's search option. And I'm going to use my laser pointer here on my phone. It's down here on the bottom. And when I click it, it jumps up to the top. And then right in that search bar, I'm going to type in Survey 123 ArcGIS, some version of that. And then when you hit search, it should bring up this app right here. And that's the icon for it. It's green and white checkbook, or it's a notebook with a check mark. And it should ask you to install. You'll see this is a screenshot of my phone. I've already installed the app. So when I search for it, it just suggests that I should open it. So if you already have this on your phone, maybe you'd forgotten, it'll let you know. Maybe you need to update it, but just click on that button to either install or open or update the app. And once you have that app installed, then you're ready to move on to installing the CowPie Pal app. So you have installed successfully the Survey 123 app on your phone. You navigate to wherever it landed on your phone. And for each of you, that's going to be at a different spot. Again, you're going to click on that green and white icon that has the notebook and the check mark. And when you do that, it's going to start loading with this image you see here on the left. It can take a couple of seconds to up to a minute to load, depending on how often you use it and how fast your phone is. When it's done loading, you're going to see this image in the middle. And you see it asks you to either sign in or manage, or they kind of hit it. You can continue without signing in. And that's the button that we want you to click. We want you to click continue without signing in. You don't need any sort of ArcGIS or any other account to use this app. So now you have opened the app and you need to install the second app, the CowPie Pal app, into that Survey 123 app. They work together. So you can go to our website and you can scan this QR code, or within the ArcGIS Survey 123 app, you can enter this website into the search engine for that app. So again, here's what the app looks like once you open it. The first thing you're going to want to do is find the app if you haven't installed it yet. So again, you're going to type it into the search engine. It should always be in this location in the Survey 123 app until they update it or change it. But that's where you're going to type the website we provided on our website, the website link we provide on our website. And once you do that, it will show you what the CowPie Pal app looks like. It should automatically install it and it should show up and it looks like that. You can see that I have multiple surveys within my Survey 123 app. I do a couple of other projects using that app. The CowPie Pal is here, and in your phone it may be in a different place. Maybe you don't have any other surveys, so it'll be the only one, or maybe you have a lot, so you might have to look for it. Each person will have a different experience based on how often you use the Survey 123 or if this is your first time. So once you've got it installed, both the Survey 123 app and you've now successfully installed our CowPie Pal app, you're ready to go. So you just want to click on that and it will open the app and it will look like this image that you see here. The first thing it's going to do is ask you to make sure your location permissions are on and that the app can use your location. That's how it's going to put your pictures and your data on the map that will be sent to us. So it'll ask you this question, you're going to click next, and then depending on whether or not your location is on your phone will provide you a different set of options. You want to turn your location on and then just continue on, and it may ask you to open the app again, or maybe it will just automatically open. It's a little bit different for everybody's phone, but it should be fairly straightforward and fairly easy to get to the app and to start collecting data. So once you've got both apps installed, you've opened the CowPie Pal app, your location is on and you're allowing access. This is what you're going to see, and this is where you can get to work. So the first thing you're going to want to do is collect data. So you click the collect button, and you can see here I have used this app before and I have sent 10 reports already. If you've never used this before, this should be blank or have a 0. And if you've used it in the past and sent items, you can look at them again if you click on the set. But if you're a first-time user or if you're collecting new data, you want to click on collect. And then it's going to open up the data collection, the survey part of the app. And this is really straightforward, user-friendly, easy to use. This is 2 screenshots of my phone. I took a screenshot of the top and I scrolled down a little bit and I took another screenshot. So this is all in one screen on my phone. You can just navigate up and down on the phone. And you can see it's very straightforward. It asks for your name, contact information. It's going to allow you to put checkbox in certain places for the livestock impacts you see, and try to be thinking of the impacts that Delaney just described. And then it's going to allow you to add your location. You can click on this button here and it will automatically locate you on an R map. Or if you want to manually identify a location, you can click on this button here. And so you can see right here, this is the bottom of that screen. It's the top of the screen. That's where I've scrolled down. And there's also a button here where it allows you to add photos. You can add them from your camera roll or from the file on your phone. And you can also include notes. So just to walk you through a little bit more detail, you can add your name. You don't have to include your name. It's helpful if you do, especially if you'd like us to reach out to you. The same with the contact information. You have to include something in this button for the name, in this box. So I include my name, but every time I use the app to collect data, I have to type it again. So the first time I use it, I put my name and then initials in parentheses. And for the next piece of data I collect, I'll just enter my initials. That makes it a little bit faster, especially in the field if you're doing a lot of these. You don't have to put anything in the email or phone number box. If you do, it's going to allow us to be able to reach out to you to ask questions or to do any follow-up to let you know what happened as a result of your report if we were able to take any action. And so then you can also check those impacts, like you probably are going to see livestock feces. We're going to get a lot of those check boxes. Maybe you've seen damage to a river or stream or a damaged fence. We want to see those kind of things. There's also a box called Other. And if you click that box, it's going to open up another option for you to add text. And like maybe you're seeing dead cows, so you would include that. Or perhaps you're in an area that's been burned recently, so or maybe in the past, but you can tell that it's a burned area that maybe should be given time to recover. That's valuable information for us to have. Or maybe the water tanks are not filled when they're supposed to be, or they don't have escape ramps for wildlife. That's valuable information for us to have. So again, you would click on the map located button there, and I didn't get a good screenshot of the map, but you just want to zoom in on that and make sure it's putting you in the right place. And then when you add photos, whether from your phone, your camera, or from your files, it's going to show you the picture that's been added. And I agree with Delaney that you don't want to add a ton of photos, but take photos of what's going to help you document in the best way, being always mindful of the best practices that Delaney shared. And you can take up to 5 photos within the app. And then you can add additional notes. Here, I just put this as a test in case I submit this. I want to know that it's not an actual report. And then you're going to click this checkbox button, check mark here at the bottom, and that's going to submit the data that you just collected. And so that's it. You're done. That is the whole process. If you have the 2 apps installed, you open CalPyPal, you collect the data in the field, and then you submit it to us. But what happens if you're out in the field and you don't have cell phone service? That's okay. The survey and 123 and the CalPyPal app both work while you are offline. I often put my phone in airplane mode because it allows me to save battery. And if I'm in the field for a long time, I want to make sure I don't have to worry about recharging. So collect as much data as you want offline, and you want to save it to your outbox. And then once you get back to service area or you get back to an internet connection, you just reopen the app and it'll allow you to send the information to us. If you click this area right here, continue the survey, it'll take you back to the survey you just did, and you can make edits, add photos, delete photos, whatever you need to do in case you realize you made a mistake. So if you save in the outbox, it should take you to this button here where you can close the survey. And when you go to close the survey, it's going to ask you to save it in drafts, maybe go back and edit the survey you just did, or maybe the survey you just did, you really don't like it, so you want to get rid of it. Just click on that trash can icon. Maybe you're doing a test run, you can get all the way to the end, and then you can just put it in the trash bin at the end. But it's very important if you are offline or in airplane mode when you're out collecting data that you remember to send it to us when you get back. If you open the app again, it's going to tell you that you have something in your outbox. You just click this button and it'll allow you to send it when you're connected. The app won't proactively like ping you to remind you that you have some data sitting there waiting to be sent. It's only going to remind you if you open it and try to use it again. So you do have to be proactive about sending this data to us. And so Delaney went through a little bit of this already, but a good report is going to include your name and contact information if you want us to reach out to you. It's not required. It's very helpful. And if we have questions, that's often the best way to get answers to those questions. If you know the name of the allotment that you're standing on, that's great. You can include it, but it's more important to have an accurate location for the data you're collecting. We can figure out what the allotment or land management unit was by taking that location and using our mapping services that we have. Make sure to check all the impacts that you think apply. That's going to help us with our data sorting and data collection and analysis. And if you can, include a description. Sometimes, if it's just a poop, you don't need to describe it. But if it's stream damage, it would be very helpful to describe that. Or if the fence is down or in misrepair, maybe a gate has been destroyed, you can include a little bit more description, and that's very helpful. And those photos should include some sort of geological sort of landmark in the background, a mountain, a very large rock, maybe some very old growth trees, maybe a sign or a road in the background. That can be very helpful. And again, something other than poop is great. Poop does provide evidence that cows were there, but it doesn't tell us much else. And because cows are allowed almost everywhere on public lands, that is often not the most helpful information, even though it's like the most ubiquitous thing that we're going to see out there. If you can get photos of brands and ear tags, that is ideal. If you can't get photos, but you have binoculars and you can see the brand or you can see the ear tag numbers, color, or letters that are on it, you can add that information to the app, or you can just write it down and maybe send us an email with that information too. We definitely don't want you to have to get too close to cows to take pictures of tags, ear tags, or brands. If you feel like it, you can find our email, let us know that you submitted a report, but our GIS person, Brandon, will be letting us know at least once a month when we have reports in our state. And always you want to keep yourself safe and legal. Make sure you're legally accessing the land that you're on. And don't do anything that would put yourself in jeopardy. You want to make sure to leave gates as you find them. If they're closed when you go through them, close them when you're done. Close them right behind you. If they're open, leave them open. Just don't do anything that would cause your safety or your ability to stay out of legal trouble to be in jeopardy. And if people are confronting you about what you're doing, I usually just say I'm bird watching, because I am bird watching. But you don't have to interact with people. You don't have to tell folks what you're doing. And so once you're done collecting your data and it gets sent to us, this is what we're going to see on our end. We will access our ArcGIS web map, and it'll show us what data points have been collected, and they show up as red dots. And so we can check this whenever we want, or if we're alerted to some new information being provided. I work in Arizona, New Mexico, so I go on the map and I just scroll right into there. I recognize a few of these dots as data points I've collected or ones I've already looked at, but I saw a new one last month right in the middle of the map there in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, right in the heart of Lobo country. So I clicked on that one to check it out. And then it pulls up the information. So it's going to actually give me 3 screens of the data, and I can scroll up and down. I can scroll up and down here within the box that popped up. It's going to tell me who did the report, all that information you provided. It's going to share with me, including the photos. I blocked out the person's name because we're never going to share the name of people publicly unless they ask us to. And so I didn't want to share that information, but this is somebody who did provide us information, and I was able to reach out to them and get more information. And we're going to work on filing a report with the Forest Service about this one now that the government is back open. So this was a person who documented stream damage. And they were very concerned because it looked like somebody had dug a trench to move water from a stream down to a lower pasture with a cow. So I took the data they provided me, I took the location, and then I used other resources I have, such as mapping apps or annual operating instructions or other databases we have access to. And I found out who the permittee was, which allotment it was, which Forest Service unit it was on, whether or not they had something called an annual operating instruction, which is sort of their authorization to graze in the years before and during when the picture was taken. I look at the last time any environmental analysis was done in this allotment. It was done in the last 2001. And then they were issued a permit, a 10-year permit in 2021. So they'll have this permit until 2031. It also tells me when cows are allowed to be on the allotment or when they're supposed to be off, how much of the forage they're supposed to use, how many cows are supposed to be out there, and then any other information. This is a report I make using the information that you submit through the CalPyPal, and then I can submit that to the Forest Service or BLM unit or whatever land manager is responsible. And then I can also find information through other databases. For me, it's the Arizona Grazing Clearinghouse website to let me know how many subsidies this permittee has gotten over the years related to livestock grazing. And that's just a bit of information that helps me understand who we're talking to. So this was the picture that was submitted. It's a pretty good picture. It's not great. It doesn't show something in the background that gives me a little bit more context, but it's pretty well zoomed out, and you can see clearly somebody has dug a trench through this area. I don't see the stream in the background. There's no picture of the pasture down below, but it is a pretty good picture. And you can see there's a really cute dog over there for size. This was another picture that was submitted by that same person. This would be less of an ideal photo. It's a little too zoomed in. It does show damage to the land. And I think there's probably some cow prints in there, but this isn't as helpful as this photo. And then this was submitted to another report was submitted, and that was the only photo I got, which was a cow poop in some pine needles. And that does tell me that there's cows that have been there, but it doesn't tell me anything else. So that's not what we need. We need something that's more like this, or more like the photos Delaney was showing you. So that is how you use the CalPyPal. That's it. And I think we are now ready for questions.
All right, cool. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Okay, so the first one, and so this is for, I believe, Delaney or Cindy. If you're out of range while using the app, please describe how we are sure it's geo-referenced properly.
Sure, I can take that one. So when you click on the little dot that will show you where the map, it'll pop up a map and it'll show you in the app itself your exact location, and you can zoom in a little bit on it and it should show you whether or not you're where you think you are. You do have to have some understanding of where you are, but I've used it all over Arizona, New Mexico, and some pretty remote places, and I almost always have it on airplane mode, and it has never put me in the wrong spot. But you can check on the map itself.
Great. Okay, so to that end, where can you find data on the location of allotments?
That's a great question. Somebody else want to take that one?
Well,
I
there are a
can.
couple different options. Sometimes you can get allotment information directly from the Forest Service. Also, the app onX now features allotment layers. So if you are a person who uses that app already, I encourage you to look at it or look into it. It is an expensive subscription or an expensive app to have. So I don't think you need to necessarily do that. We are hoping to have a companion for this app that will be able to tell people if they're on an allotment, that you can see where you are when you're georeferencing, but we're still working on that part. I feel like I'm missing something though.
Well, we have we have an ArcGIS hub on our that I believe is linked from our website, or will be soon linked from our website if it's not now. And it includes a map of Western grazing allotments. So it shows all of the allotments on public land, and you can click on it and actually see the information about the allotment. It tells you, what its name is and some other basic information about the allotment, or as much as we have. And I think we're going to expand that to try and include more information as we go here. And then you could screenshot those if you wanted to take it with you. Or if you have cell service, of course, you can access it while you're out.
And
But that's an option.
I went ahead and put that map that Josh was talking about, our hub, in the chat and also in the Q&A for people to copy and paste. And just as a reference, or an example as well, we're going to be sending out references following in the next couple of days with this recording, so you all will have access to the information.
And also, you don't have to know that you're on a grazing allotment. If you're out recreating or enjoying yourself on public lands, doing whatever you do on public lands, and you see something that doesn't look great to you related to livestock grazing, if the livestock presence is bothering you and there's evidence that you think looks like maybe they're overgrazing or they're damaging sensitive habitat, you're on public land. If you know that you're on public land, you can go ahead and document that. You don't have to know that you're on a grazing allotment. And it's a safe assumption to say that you're almost always on a grazing allotment.
All right. So this one is in reference to a photo Delaney showed. The erosion characteristics reviewed earlier, do they need to be linked directly to livestock, or are they an indication of the land needing rest by themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the intention of the app is to really document the impacts of livestock grazing. And so if you can, if there's evidence that does link it directly, that is helpful. But also, these biotic communities that help slow down erosion, like the evidence is pretty clear there between the impacts of the disturbance of livestock grazing and then the downstream impacts of erosion. So if it doesn't all fit into one frame, you certainly can document that. And then sometimes, and I didn't emphasize this in my presentation, but sometimes just having a short narrative in that note section can really help us, and I've found it with my own points too, help sort of describe what the picture is trying to capture. And so in the field, it can be kind of tedious to type out your description, but especially if you sort of are seeing a larger systemic problem like that, it's worth it to take the time.
Okay, great. Question for everyone. Do we want to see photos of fence line contrast in vegetation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so fence line photos is very important, right? Yeah, okay, great.
They're very helpful.
Okay. Can we get allotment maps for Avenza so I can see what allotment I'm in?
My experience with this is that the allotment layers are gigantic. Like there's so much data within those allotment layers that we have in GIS. But if you have a specific area, especially if it's geographically fairly limited, we might be able to make a map that you can use through an app that you already are using. So if it's for a very specific project, I think it's kind of a slippery slope. There's only so much mapping capacity we have, but I think that would be a valuable thing to maybe get together in the future.
Okay, great. Why isn't there a standard entry for cattle defecation directly in an active stream or directly in the water?
I think I can maybe answer that one. It's not, so it's an impact. It's not necessarily an illegal impact. And again, cattle defecate pretty much everywhere on our public lands. One cow pie in a stream may not have a very significant impact. It's sort of it's the amount of contamination to that stream with both like the nutrients from the cow pie, maybe E. coli, things like that over time and collectively that are going to have the impact. I'm not sure we could maybe add that to the list, but I think if you see stream damage, if you click stream damage, and you could add a note like cow pies in the stream, that would be helpful. But yeah, it's something we can consider adjusting. That's one of the things I meant to say is this is a relatively new app. We have developed it ourselves. We are not really in a beta phase anymore, but we're still in a learning phase. And the more people who use it, the more feedback we get, the more it can improve. And I've seen that happen with other surveys I've done, like on beaver streams. This is my 6th year or its organization's 6th year of using a very similar app to do their surveys. It has improved greatly over the last 6 years, and it's largely because of feedback just like that.
Great. How can members of the public get access to the data that's being collected?
Yeah, so that data is sort of collated into our ArcGIS webpage, which is not public. But if you have specific data that you're interested in, or specific data in an area, or you'd like to see that, put out onto a map, we are happy to share that that data. There's just not a clean way to sort of make it public facing immediately.
Right.
Yeah, and we do want to protect the names. We would, not share names of folks who have submitted data.
Right. Okay, where can we find all of the info about specific allotments?
Okay, so that's like a half-hour presentation that I can also give. And Delaney or Josh, if you want to jump in, just interrupt me. But there's a variety of resources. The BLM has a website called the Rangeland Administration System, or RAS. You can do a lot of database searching within their system that you can find a lot of information about when cows are supposed to be on or off allotments. There are usually on Forest Service and some BLM websites, they'll have maps of allotments. We have the map of allotments on our website that's a little bit more generalized. And then you can use that to sort of look at which land management unit you're on, whether it's BLM or Forest Service. Go to that Forest Service unit, that district, ranger district. Sometimes they'll have very specific information about the livestock grazing management at the Forest Service level, but more and more we're seeing, especially in the last, I would say, 10 months or so, a lot of that information is starting to disappear. We have obtained some of it through FOIA, and we have shared a lot of it, but it's a bit of a research project. Often the best way is you can call the land manager and ask them the question that you have, and for them to share a map with you. And they may do that, but it's a little bit of a research project. I'd be happy to share my presentation on that. I can share that with you to send as an email, Grace, because it's got all of the links and how to use the information in it.
Yeah, and just to reiterate for everybody again that we know this is a lot of information. We're talking about a lot of links. We're talking about maps, and we'll compile this all together and send this out to all of the attendees following the presentation in the next couple of days. Okay, another question that I think has already been answered, but might as well just go. Are you wanting people to report any observed degradation on public lands? I'm wondering how people would know if an allotments are under current permit or if that information is redundant. I'm just curious, for example, is a report of cattle on an actively permitted allotment useful?
I think that it is more useful to capture an effect of cattle than a presence of cattle, unless you have, a report of livestock on an active allotment doesn't necessarily give us new information. And so if there's a vacant allotment or an adjacent allotment that you don't think there should be cows on, or if you're not sure and you're under the impression that it might not be sort of above board, it's great to document that. But especially if you can document the story of what impact that livestock is having on the landscape. And so I think the question about, defecation directly into a stream, like that tells a story about a resource that's really important to the public, and how it's being impacted. And so I would keep that in mind when you're deciding whether or not you want to submit data points. But also, I think there's a lot of sort of nuance there with different management, different field offices, different history of permits and that sort of thing.
All right, cool. Well, anything else? We have any more? Questions are done. Oh, got one more, and then I think we'll close this out. Does OnX Backcountry have allotment layers or just OnX Hunt?
I do not know that answer off the top of my head. I'd have to look into it.
Cindy, do you know?
I don't know. I don't use Onyx.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit
Um,
of an expensive one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Good.
you-
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say to kind of go back to some of the things that came up before is, we are also a resource that we want you all to feel like you should be able to reach out to, right? So our state directors, we FOIA for this information, we collect this information, we have the maps of all the places. Um, you can get in touch with us if you know that you're going to be going somewhere and you expect to be seeing things that you want to document, or reach out ahead of time. If you're just out recreating and something comes up and you're like, hey, I saw this documented in the app, that's great, but feel free to follow up with us and be like, hey, I saw this, I'm not sure where I was, do you have the maps, can you share that with me? We're happy to help with that kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of kind of what I tried to express in my presentation earlier is like, we're talking about hundreds of millions of acres of federal public land that are all grazed by livestock. And we are 9 people spread out across that massive landscape. And we can only cover so much ground. And we find what we find based on our own travels, because we see something from maybe the agency is doing some assessment and we track that. Maybe it's just because we were out on our own camping and hiking and fishing and backpacking like everybody else does, and we saw something and it tipped us off. Who knows? But we really are depending on and really appreciate it when members of the public, you all, are out on the land, have these experiences and share it with us. That's what we're here for. We're an advocacy organization. We're trying to advocate for you and to make public lands better. We're trying to do that for you all, because not everybody has the time to like go reach out to the agency and follow up 5 times with before they respond to you, and appeal decisions and file litigation, right? Like we're not, but we could really use your help. So please feel free to contact our staff and get in touch and ask questions, and you know we have a lot we can share.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any final words? All
I
right.
just wanted to respond real quick to
Yeah.
there was a question in the chat about sort of the safety of the cattle from a producer's perspective, and that we don't want to be harassing livestock, and so I think just keeping in mind like to keep a safe distance and a respectful distance, recognizing that cattle may respond to your approaching, but also at the end of the day there are public lands, and so I think approach respectfully, and use your best judgment. And yeah, by no means should you be getting up in in a mama cow's business. That will not end well for anyone.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone, for attending, for your great questions, and for our presenters. And again, we will be sending out this recording as well as resources for everybody. Please get in touch with our staff at any point in time. Our state directors' email addresses are on our website, as well as our general email address, which is wwp@westernwatersheds.org. And always feel free to reach out to us on social media as well through direct message. I'd be happy to chat to you and send you to the appropriate person. So thanks everyone again. Hope you have a great evening. Thanks for caring about Western public lands and the wildlife that depend on them. See you
Thanks,
later.
Grace.
Bye.
Thanks y'all for tuning in.